Mythic rating doesn't work anymore. When you say mythic rating is dying, I actually agree. But when you say mythic rating doesn't work anymore, this is where I disagree. Because mythic rating does work. But the problem with mythic rating is it works for a very, very small spectrum of people, and Blizzard themselves have done a lot of gatekeeping to keep a lot of people out of mythic rating the way that they do things. So there are definitely problems there. But it does work. It's just dying.
So, there's a noise going around in a segment of the Warcraft community, the idea that mythic rating is actually dying. This is a tone that's been around, and it's one that's very much amplified with the disbandment of Big Dumb Gaming Guild, which were one of the fairly well-known top-end mythic guilds.
Never heard about them, obviously.
As well as a few others. Now, even with that, I suspect that to many of you watching today, that's maybe...
By the way, I find it funny to have known and World of Warcraft guild in the same sentence, because no one gives a shit about any World of Warcraft guild at the moment. The PvP scene is dead, no one cares about it, no one can watch it, and look at this. What am I even looking at? I have no idea. What is this supposed to be? What is this? What is that? What's happening? There's 15 weak autos, 37 trillion buffs, and everything's purple for some reason. I don't know what's going on here, okay? This is why no one cares about world firsts, watching raids, or watching PvP, because PvP is arguably sometimes even worse than this.
A noise you haven't heard, because the reality is most people do not play Mythic. I mean, why sweat about the problems of the 1% or even the 1% of the 1%, the likes of Echo and Limit? But of course the thing is,
obviously,
if what works for them is barely working for them and also for the top 200, and it's even worse for people who are not in the top 200, and loads of people are just writing the thing off, then that really is quite a problem for the game. Now, today's video was written by myself.
Well, to be fair, you need to understand, World of Warcraft has like 3 difficulty levels for raids, I think. Normal, heroic, and then there's mythic, I think. Or there's even more than that. In any case, I don't technically on a principle level find there to be a problem that there exists a difficulty that is literally designed only for the top end of players. It kind of makes sense. If you want endgame, that's your endgame. And if you can't do that endgame, well, it is what it is. Play Lost Ark, hard game. Hell Mode Walton, even harder than the actual hard game. Okay? Not a lot of people did it. Not a lot of people attempted it. Everyone understood that, hey, that is only for the most hardcore of players. And so is technically Mythic.
And also Dakor, who really led a lot of it. He is our resident cutting-edge mythic raider. He's been doing that absolutely for years, and, well, he's also had his guild disband. You've probably seen a number of YouTube videos pop up around this idea as well, often from pretty
Nope, not at all.
top-end people. As for me, well, I'm firmly a rung down on that ladder. Heroic. I got ahead of the curve, and that's kind of the goal ticked off for a season. But even with that, I, and a lot of people like me, are feeling somewhat lost right now. You see, Aberrus and Emir Drasil Heroic, they're genuinely too easy for my raid team. But of course for us, Mythic is totally closed off. We're happy with our group of friends. We don't really want to invest the extra time and effort into getting 10 people while also somehow still preserving the social circle that we enjoy, so Mythic 20 is just not feasible. So, we are in a position where normal and heroic raiding is more accessible than ever, but for many old heroic raiders,
this lighting seems so strange.
the game is just no longer tuned for them, no longer tuned for us. But the next rung up in the ladder itself is struggling majorly. That's happening in 4 big areas, and that's what we're going to break down today. Tuning, design, progression, and barriers. We went deep.
And by the way, yeah, I don't think Mythic is actually a problem in general. I think it's how Blizzard balances shit is the problem. Because the difficulty Billiard actually completely just gave you all the information that you need. Hey, there's like normal, there's heroic, and those things are ridiculously easy, and anyone can do them blindfolded and without arms. Paraplegics, it is what it is. But then there's mythic that you can't even touch. These difficulties should actually be kind of apart, and when you finish one difficulty, you should, by technicality, be kinda almost capable of finishing the next one, because the next one is supposed to be a step up, not 15 trillion steps up.
We've spent days reading, learning, listening, and that's only possible because of today's sponsor. Squarespace, they're an online site builder with a host of tools to support your needs, be they a portfolio.
I don't
And
like
when you're ready to send
Squarespace,
it
it's
live,
stupid.
you can use code Bellular Gaming to get 10% off an annual plan. This part of the story starts with Sepulchre of the First Ones, which was a truly wild time. Blizzard basically got things so wrong with difficulty and gear acquisition.
No, Blizzard completely ruined all the story of World of Warcraft and people got really pissed. That's what happened. No one even cared about this shit tier raid, okay? Everyone cared about the fact that Shadowlands completely just took all the existing lore in World of Warcraft and just started wiping its ass. And the ass never got clean, they just continued wiping. It was bad.
That the likes of Anduin and the Jailer became some of the most...
Oh god, well, what the fuck is this? Like, is he looking down or up? I can't even almost tell here. This is... Yeah, okay. Nice. I love it.
Nerfed bosses in World of Warcraft's entire history. This is a situation that led to game director Ian Hazzikostas saying this: "We'd rather not have to nerf things 20 times for the rank 100, 1000, or 5000 guilds to be able to blaze that same trail afterwards." He was talking about those nerfs, and people thought that with him saying that, things would change. They have a little bit, but not that much. Yes, Tindral and Farak were not as bad, but they still required a lot of heavy nerfs. It's almost as if Mythic has got its true Race to World First difficulty, a mode for the top 200, and then, many nerfs later, the Mythic mode that most people are actually able to progress through. In an ideal world, these nerfs wouldn't be needed. Natural gear progression is the thing that ultimately is supposed to do that job, but in reality, it doesn't. What actually happens on the ground is that most guilds outside the very top end do rely on nerfs for progress. Yeah, they can run into a brick wall for countless hours before a nerf, but that isn't fun, and by this stage, they've been trained to expect the nerfs. Clearly then, Mythic difficulty is...
Yeah, that's also true. People expect everything to get nerfed. First week it's out, a lot of people don't even attempt it because they know it's overtuned and it's gonna get nerfed. But that's just Blizzard being a shit tier company in general. Blizzard have not balanced a single game for the last 20 years. The closest they ever got to balance is Warcraft 3. And yeah, none of the people who made that possible are still around. Everything else is a shit show. I don't know how Blizzard balances things. I'm assuming they have some kind of spreadsheets where they have written Sinister Strike damage should be the exact same percentile damage as, I don't know, a Shadow Bolt damage, and that's how they balance things, which is completely stupid and makes absolutely no sense. But, it is what it is.
Is calibrated for the race, and the rest are just left waiting for nerfs. That is something that, especially with, say, Tindral...
Also, I don't play retail, but I have to say, the stuff that gets added on bosses as mechanics is just so mind-bogglingly stupid most of the time. I have said this before. Before playing Lost Ark, I didn't really know what's a good design boss, turns out. After playing Lost Ark, I understood one thing. Whenever you have a boss and it places shit on the ground, and that's not the main mechanic, that is a poor and complete trash design for a boss in general. There should never be anything on the ground unless it's the literal main mechanic that you are currently looking at. You're not even damaging the boss. You're just looking at that thing because that's the mechanic that's currently happening. Just randomly pulling pools of shit down on the ground where people can't walk or need to, like, dodge it, without that being the main mechanic, a mechanic like this should not even exist. Every time I hear someone talk bad about World of Warcraft raiding, it's honestly this. It's honestly exactly this. It's just pulls and pulls and pulls of stuff on the ground, and every single boss seems to be the same. Every boss has a bunch of swirly things that just plump on the ground, and you shouldn't stand into it. Every boss just puts down fire and some crap like that. This is bad. Does World of Warcraft even have a single boss that actually requires you to move as a group or something like that? I have never heard of that. I think World of Warcraft is fundamentally not even using the fact that you can split the boss in multiple parts, like gates, for example, like Lost Ark, and some of them require movement, some of them require coordination, where to put things down and like that. But now everything in World of Warcraft is just a pool of shit. I think that's super bad design.
Well, many faced this time round. Of course, what these nerfs are, though, are goalposts moving, and that's also a problem. We have this race first, majority of the player base second kind of approach that to many robs the satisfaction of earning a kill. Nobody likes it when the goalposts move. The experience of a boss going from a brick wall to a face roll is quite invalidating to people's progress. Your past efforts matter less because the kill was tampered with, and the nerfs often require brand new strategies, which, again, invalidates your progress and your prior efforts. Relearning a fight 200 pulls in ain't fun. Then there's the flip side, the guilds who actually do progress. Well, the challenge that they just overcame is then reduced, and if those players are...
Okay. The game is so bad he needs a red cross in the middle just to show where his character is, otherwise he can't even figure out where his character is. Yeah. You know what I think World of Warcraft should do? They should ban DPS meters in general, because, you know, you should be able to figure out who are the good players and bad players, not based on pure DPS numbers, okay? But people look at DPS numbers and that's pretty much all there is. They should ban all DPS add-ons. And they should ban most UI garbage. And not make fights around the idea that you need all of this. Like, look at this. Tracking cooldowns of bosses. That's stupid. These skills that the boss uses should be something that's well choreographed, that you can see, and that you need to take appropriate action to dodge or maneuver around or soak or whatever. Not just have a cooldown because this is essentially a throwdown mechanic that no one gives a shit about. Horrible design.
Motivated by ranking, if they care about ranking, that feels quite awful, and ranking does matter because Blizzard does support an official leaderboard. This stuff doesn't feel good. WoW's problem, then, is that Mythic is caught between the difficulty demands of the race and the difficulty demands of the majority of its player base, and as a mode, it doesn't seem to be growing. It's a difficulty mode that ultimately feels like it's made to cater to an unofficial esport, and then later nerfed into a design that works for the top end of WoW's player base. Ultimately, then, no matter what way you cut it, the situation with nerfs is not ideal, and it shouldn't continue. It does, though, lead me to our final point on tuning. Okay, this is a smaller problem, but if it's fixed, it could rather counterintuitively actually make things worse. Let me explain. There is a mild increase in difficulty from bosses 1 through to 6, and then a massive jump up to Smolderon and beyond. Now, many would say that a more smooth difficulty curve would be ideal, right? Something about boiling frogs. But the problem is, if you smoothed out that difficulty curve, you'd probably end up making some of the first 6 bosses, well, harder. And as we've just covered with tuning, that actually might extend some of these problems to even more guilds. Okay, we've talked about tuning, But that's not the only thing involved. Now,
That is true, by the way. People often overlook it, but I think it's fine design if the first bosses in the raid are actually easier, and then the difficulty does ramp up substantially at the last bosses.
next, we gotta talk about design. Okay, design.
Imagine how bad it would feel if you go into a raid and the first boss is the hardest one, and you can't deal with it. You get no gear, you completely wasted your time, but if the last boss is the hardest, then, well, you know, at least you got something for your efforts. You have a reason to come back next week, because now you're stronger, and next week you're gonna be even stronger. But if the first boss is unsurpassable, well then, well, congratulations, you're effed.
Design-wise, there's two major things I want to hit. Number one, instant wipes. Number two, private ores, because surprisingly, they haven't worked.
What?
First up, instant wipes. This is one of the larger problems in modern WoW. Instant wipes that are caused by a single player slight mistake. Say, missing an interrupt ever so slightly, soaking an orb half a second too soon. Essentially, binary pass-fail mechanics where if one single person fails, the entire group goes down. Now, yes, 100% perfect.
This is a problem, but the reality is I don't think there's a way to actually bypass this problem. Again, this is why I'm saying a DPS meter should be banned. Because if you have that in the game, DPS meters are irrelevant. Who do you want? The guy who does 10,000 damage but wipes you on the mechanic because he's a retard? Or the guy who does 1k damage but never wipes on the mechanic? It's kind of clear that you actually want the guy with 1k DPS but who's smart enough to actually do the mechanic. So, you know, man, Warcraft raiding has so many problems, it's insane.
Perfect play from everyone may be intended for the race. Is that best for the game, though? That's an interesting question, and it's one that we have an answer for directly from World of Warcraft's game director. This is what Ian had to say. When is it okay to wipe the raid instantly for a mistake? Honestly, the answer...
Always. Because there's no alternative. I cannot imagine an alternative for this. Because the reality is, if you don't have raid wipe mechanics, then... well, again, everything's just a DPS race, theoretically. There is no hardship to it. And again, every mechanic that kills a player is technically almost like a wipe mechanic. So again, I don't think we can just get around this. I don't think this is something that can go away. So, it is what it is. Now, admittedly, you could make it... Lost Ark actually had some situations like this. So there were situations where there were everyone needs to do something. I don't know, like the button mashing things or something like that. And if people fail, you're gonna receive a huge amount of damage. But that damage, one, would not kill you. Two, it was possible to shield over it and survive it, even if it was enough damage to kill you, with cooldowns of, you know, supports and whatnot. I think that is a pretty decent solution to raid wipe mechanics that could potentially, you know, actually fail the whole raid if someone messes up. And I think if, you know, it can just be soaked by using a couple of cooldowns for from the supports and maybe yourself, I think that's not that bad. But then again, the less mechanics like this you have, the more it is just a DPS check. And that's also not great. Then everything is too easy.
Answer should be almost never, at least when it's more like a single person's Twitch reaction mistake of you fail if you do a mechanic incorrectly or whatever. Ian goes on to say, it's totally reasonable on Mythic to kill the player for making a mistake like that, but he says, and this is the direct quote, to say the entire raid is over because someone was 1 yard out of position is not our aim. Okay, the point then is killing a...
They could, by the way, circumvent this by adding certain classes, certain abilities. But there's problems with this. There's so many problems. I personally don't know how to fix them. I just don't.
Player fine, wiping the whole team, that is not their aim, and that's the words of WoW's game director, who himself comes from a high-end raiding background. If that is their aim, Yggdrasil has not met it. Yggdrasil launched with 9 such mechanics. It's a pretty cut and dry topic, as is our next one. Private auras. Private auras were initially hailed as a solution to the weak aura problem, where weak auras would essentially automate very complex boss mechanics. And the idea here is that anything protected by a private aura just can't be read by an add-on, and that means that weak auras wouldn't be able to do things like auto-assign player positions, timers, rolls, or anything like that. The context here is...
Yeah, weak auras should not exist. Just in general, weak auras should not exist. They should not be able to just give a player, a road where he needs to go so he doesn't wipe.
A lot, but mostly Shadowlands for today's purposes. Especially in the Sepulchre of the First One's race, the weak auras got completely out of control. It had many mechanics that required excellent split-second reactive decision-making from multiple people at the same time, and if that didn't happen, there would be a wipe. Yeah, I think you can understand the source of some of the Ian quotes we've talked about so far in the video. Anyway, with such punishing mechanics, it's no wonder that weak auras became extremely important to top-end guilds. The intent then was for private auras to solve this, but in reality, it just hasn't worked. You see, in many cases, private auras were applied to mechanics that were essentially impossible to do without some form of workaround. For examples, we've got Neltharion bombs, Smolderon orbs, and Farak orbs. Now, yes, the private aura means that it's impossible for an add-on to automatically tell people what to do. But do you know what private auras don't do? They don't stop players replicating that by just manually forwarding the information to weak auras via macro, which negates all of the private aura work with a single key press. Now the problem is, those macros could be secret. They could be rather brittle. So if you're a top guild that has got a dedicated weak auras development team, this stuff is actually better than fine. It's literally a competitive advantage because you have the resources to do a good workaround and other people won't. Those guilds below that level are essentially left waiting for Echo and Liquid
Who cares about the world first?
to share their solutions. And because this stuff tends to be very complex and very custom, it's rarely a smooth experience where guilds are ending up spending large portions of raid nights just configuring weak aura packs, which is not fun. Now yes, they could simply not do this and try to do the fight normally, but if the mechanic feels wholly unreasonable to do without a weak aura, then the weak aura will feel like your only option. And this is rather well put by Seliathan, who put together a big old write-up for Raider.io on this issue. Here's the quote. When difficulty no longer comes from actively playing the game, but the juggling of third-party tools, something is amiss. That absolutely is the case. And for an example, for Dakor's guild, they would spend multiple hours on multiple bosses getting weak auras ready across 20 players. Now they raid for 2.5 hours a night, and that means that large portions of their raid time went into weak aura configurations. And it's at this point that I would remind you...
That's so stupid. That is so stupid.
That World of Warcraft is a game and a hobby. Maybe this is not what it should be. So between binary, wipe mechanics that hinge on a single player's reaction time and the ongoing issue with weak auras, Mythic is quite simply not hitting its design goals as stated by the developers and as felt by the players. Meanwhile, we then have all of the tuning issues happening on top of that. This is pretty rough, and it's happening to players who, to even show up, have got to go through quite a few hurdles. Organization is a nightmare in 3 main ways: roster, comp, and time. Let's learn why. Starting with roster. Mythic has always had a fixed 20-man requirement, and that's inherently hard. If you look at other games like Final Fantasy XIV, we see that even in their hardest difficulties, they're moving away from large team sizes like that. So if your guild has only got a stable roster of between 10 to 15 players, you are simply out of luck. If that's your social circle and you would like to do hard content, World of Warcraft is not...
Yeah, I don't understand the 20 people thing. 10 is completely fine. You can make such good encounters with 10 people. It's insane. Or, 15 if you want to be like that, but 20, that's a little bit much. The more people you have, the more chaotic everything is, and the less you can actually understand everything, and also the more you need to rely on weak auras and, macros and things like that. Which is bad, obviously.
A game for you. You either recruit more people, which risks your social enjoyment and team cohesion, you abandon your guild to do mythic content somewhere else, or you give up and just stop at heroic mode. The problem with heroic, though, is that, as I'll note, it's not what it used to be. Razageth was a very satisfying kill for my own team. Sarkareth was easier, less satisfying. Farak was an absolute pushover, which is insane given he was the end of expansion boss. Yet, for a guild like mine, well, Farak Heroic is the end of the line. We're not going to split up. We don't want to recruit more people. And you might say, that's a you problem. And you're right.
Bruv, this guy's just standing in the line thing. It even shows him how long it actually takes for the line to explode, and he's just still standing in it. Wow.
It is a me problem, but the thing is, if thousands of teams are in a similar position, then what in isolation is a me problem, well, that turns into a problem for WoW. On the other end of the scale, there is the problem of over-recruiting. If your attendance is close to 100%, which you would certainly hope for, then there will be people on the bench who just won't see any play and who wants to be stuck in the bench. Those people will eventually leave. 20 players is hard right now. WoW makes it even harder, and a key part of that is our next point, and that is composition. Just bring the player, not the class. Optimization only matters for Race to World First guilds. That sounds like a reasonable thing to say, but it is missing context. It's implying the whole thing is a self-inflicted avoidable problem caused by sweaty Race to World First players and the meta slaves who follow.
I mean, true and not true at the same time, I would say. Everyone wants to, deal more damage and whatnot, so everyone wants to bring someone who can give them a beneficial buff. And, well, it would be pretty easy, for example, in Classic, if just every class got given some kind of buff that increases damage or whatever by a certain amount, and it would be good. But they can't even do that in Classic, let alone retail. So, yeah, this is an absolute joke. This is an absolute joke.
The reality, though, is more like this. With how impactful raid buffs are nowadays, there's almost no choice left in group comp. In some of the popular standard comps, there's like 5 free slots. 15 are pretty much rigid. Now, why would somebody shoot themselves in the foot by using a suboptimal comp for months of raid progression, especially with all of the difficulties?
Also, the irony here is very stupid and delicious at the same time. It's the fact that, people don't want to use suboptimal comps, but the reality is, most people don't even know why that comp is optimal. Most people don't know if there's some kind of combo that people need to press together to do most damage or be most efficient. Okay? You can, if you use the most optimal meta comp, and just get a team of randos, they're not going to make that comp magically work because they don't know what makes that comp work. Unless it's literally just buffs. And in which case, well, fuck it, just give everyone some kind of buffs again. Like, giving every class a buff that increases something by 2 or 3% or something is not hard, Blizzard. It's really not hard. And that does not even erode class identity, okay? It just doesn't. You can do it. There's no problem with it. There's no issue. There's no nothing. But anyway, I think that's pretty much it for this. That was Billiard. This was Quizzer saying thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.